Join us now live from the site of the G20 in Buenos Aires, Argentina. NBC News chief White House correspondent Hallie Jackson. She is in the room there where there'll be a signing ceremony shortly. Hallie, it's been a busy day for the president on Twitter talking about the Russia investigation, the latest developments with Michael Cohen. What do you expect the rest of the day from the president?
Well, let's start off what happened this morning, Willie, and the president tweeting just before 7 o'clock local time as he was getting into his motorcade to go meet with the Argentinian president for that handshake. He made a few remarks there after having tweeted about the news that we've been talking about for roughly 24 hours now, the idea that this Trump Tower potential development in Moscow was being discussed by Michael Cohen during the presidential campaign. The president this morning said it was very legal and, in his words, very cool that he was doing these business deals or considering potential business deals in the run up to his bid for the presidency. But of course, Willie, as you remember, as I remember from covering the campaign, the president did not openly discuss this Moscow deal and in fact repeatedly said during the campaign and even as recently as this fall that he in fact had nothing to do, no dealings with Russia. So I expect that when the president arrives here in this room, we're at a hotel in downtown Buenos Aires, the president will be appearing with the leaders of Canada and Mexico as well to sign what the president dubs the USMCA, essentially the new NAFTA deal. So Prime Minister Trudeau, President Peña Nieto will be here with Donald Trump. There may be an opportunity to get some questions to him. You can see we're not too far from the podium. We expect each of those leaders to make remarks. But I'll tell you the big thing that we're going to be watching coming up in a few hours, and that is what they call the class photo, right? That moment where we will see all of the G20 leaders gathering here in Argentina, and there is the potential for some wildly awkward and uncomfortable moments when President Trump comes face to face with Vladimir Putin, right? Hours after calling off that meeting in a surprise move on Air Force One. So the Kremlin this morning saying that they have obviously received notification that the meeting's off. They found out via the president's tweet, by the way. So what will that interaction look like? And then, of course, there's the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who will be here as well. Mohammed bin Salman, the president under serious scrutiny now, under fire from even congressional allies to more directly confront MBS here. So that's going to be a moment, Willie, that's happening right around 10 o'clock Eastern time. We'll be keeping an eye on that. Yeah, it's going to be an awkward day, and we do hope you get some questions to the president up there. Hallie, thanks so much. We'll check back in with you. So, Richard, let's talk about that awkward moment. Let's start with Putin, and then we can go to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Do you do the handshake? Do you do the ceremonial stuff with Putin in this moment? And then afterward, do you go up and approach the Crown Prince and shake his hand, given that you've given him a pass for what the CIA says is the ordering of the murder of a Washington Post journalist? Will the president do these things? I would think it's likely. Should the president do these things? I think with Putin, it's all right to have, if you will, a handshake. What really matters is what his reactions are, what his conversations are like with the Europeans. Is there any sort of a common front or joint statement about pushing back against the Russians, new sanctions, new arms transfers to Ukraine? Can he persuade the Europeans to reduce some of their energy dependence on Russia? This is where his terrible relationships in Germany, in France, in Britain will really undermine any ability to push back against Putin. So whether he shakes Putin's hands or not is almost secondary. With MBS, again, this administration is doing Saudi Arabia's bidding. What we saw up on the Hill this week with the Secretary of State and Defense essentially taking the Saudi position, this is not what the United States should be doing. We should be, if anything, saying any support for MBS is conditional on his doing X, Y, and Z in Yemen or letting certain people out of jail. But to give him a pass is outrageous. So I would say any sign of normalcy with him, that somehow all is forgiven, we're going to let bygones be bygones, would be wildly, wildly inappropriate. That said, sitting here, I can't tell you he won't do it. My guess is he may actually do it, because this would be 100% consistent with what he and Jared Kushner have been arguing. I think it's wrong. I think it's short-sighted. For someone who wrote a book called The Art of the Deal, there's a stunning lack of leverage being used here to get the Saudis to change their behavior, which needs to be changed across the board. I would have sent an envoy to the king and say, don't send the Crown Prince there. It's not going to be a normal relationship. We're not prepared to do that, but
the administration is just giving them a pass.
Ayman Mohyeldin joins us at the table as well this morning. Ayman, what's it going to be like down there between the Crown Prince and the President?
Well, I think from the Saudi perspective, it is to try to normalize this, to close this chapter, to be on the world stage and move forward. And I think, as Richard was pointing out, it's going to come down to how the United States responds to this Crown Prince on the world stage. There is no doubt that the Saudis want to move beyond this chapter. They want to try to get the kind of normalization, if you can, from the President. I think a lot of it is going to come down to body language. I think a lot of people in the region, and even in the U.S., don't forget the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, went to Saudi Arabia shortly after the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, and it was all smiles and laughs. And a lot of people criticized the Secretary of State for willing, or at least be willing, to sit for a photo opportunity with the Crown Prince, where he was smiling and laughing, and all the language that has come out of there since then, saying there's no smoking gun, we don't have the evidence, the intelligence community is not definitive about it, using all kinds of, hasn't made a final conclusion, about it. So I think the body language is going to be key today to see, as the President, does he normalize the relationship with the Saudis, or does it mark a new chapter for the Saudi Arabian Crown Prince on the world stage?
David Ignatius, isn't that horse out of the barn? Hasn't he already normalized it by his actions, by going out publicly and taking the side of the Crown Prince? So whatever he does down there today, whether he shakes his hand or turns his back to him, Saudi Arabia already has to be pleased with the way the President has approached this.
I think you're right. The decision that President Trump has made essentially is to stand by Mohammed bin Salman, to say that the decisive evidence of his guilt in the killing of my colleague Jamal Khashoggi will never emerge. This is now a photo opportunity. The main work has been done. I think for the Saudis, this is about moving forward. I think Mohammed bin Salman knows that he just has to get out in public, take the hit. The Saudis understand there'll be a lot of criticism. They want to just keep moving and survive this moment of intense global anger over the Khashoggi killing, hoping that they'll get through this in 6 months or a year to something better. The final thing we really need to focus on is the war in Yemen. This is the most disastrous humanitarian crisis in the world. I hope there will be some discussion in Buenos Aires with these leaders about how they can help the U.S. and other key parties bring an end to that war.
Okay, everybody sit tight. We got to fit in a break here still ahead. We are waiting that live event with President Trump in Buenos Aires. We'll bring that to you just as soon as it begins. Much more with our panel when Morning Joe comes right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.